We're here at DevConnections at Spring 2012 in Las Vegas and having a blast hanging out with all the different developers that are here and learning a lot about different technologies and all kinds of fun things. And I have John Papa with us today. John, introduce yourself real quick before we jump in.
How's everybody doing? My name's John Papa, and I do a lot of web technologies, and I'm one of the speakers here at DevConnections.
And what are you speaking on this week?
This week it seems to be the gamut. We've got some Windows 8 talks with XAML and Metro-style UI apps. Also got jQuery, some different JavaScript libraries like Knockout and JS Render. Got a lot of stuff going on.
Awesome. I'm glad to have you here. What we're going to talk about is, if you're a web developer, you've probably seen there's a pretty big shift going on lately between maybe server-side and client-side technologies, and the big buzzword nowadays is JavaScript, which back in the late 90s was kind of the evil word, but all of a sudden it's considered cool, and all the cool kids are doing it. So what's your take on how things are shifting and what you're seeing out there in the wild, I guess?
It's interesting because it's not so much what you want to do, but where the market is leading you for the technologies. And lately, as you say, client technology has really taken the forefront. So things like JavaScript and CSS and HTML5 are really becoming more popular for developers because that's where a lot of the jobs are these days. It's one of the reasons I have more requests to do talks on those topics in general, as opposed to the ones I used to do on server-side ASP.NET or SQL Server, or any framework even for that matter.
Right.
They're still hot, but client seems to be taking the big forefront now.
What's the shift you're seeing? I mean, are people still doing most of their stuff on the server with whether it's PHP or ASP.NET or MVC or client-side focus, or what do you think?
I think there's a lot of, there's always is the app in existence or is it a new app? A lot of the apps in existence, they're kind of sticking with where they were, but a lot of the new apps that are being developed, they're building a more client-side focus. So things that we traditionally thought that we do on the server, like rendering pages and processing templates, we're now actually doing a lot of that on the client side with a lot of these JavaScript libraries.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that trend. One of the big things I know that you've seen and I've seen as well is a single-page application concept.
Yep. The SPA.
The SPA, which is a little misleading. It sounds like there's one page to rule them all. But
yes.
Of course, that's not the case because you'd have code from here to Australia in one page. But tell us, what's SPA in your mind and why is it kind of so popular, and what are some of the technologies you're seeing that people are moving towards?
That's a good question. So SPA is kind of more like a concept than it is a technology, as you know. It's a single page app. The idea is that you're on the page and you're kind of keeping the user there, so the user experience is brought through by keeping them on the page without having to do postbacks all the time. So instead of having maybe 10 different HTML pages where you're posting back and doing a lot of different events, you have one HTML page where you're pulling things in with templates, you're using local routing, and a lot of JavaScript libraries go into this. And it's a big trend these days. And Microsoft's getting on the ship with this. ASP.NET MVC, the new beta, that's out. It's got a lot of SPA stuff built into it. I think it's labeled experimental.
Yeah.
But it's very heavy. And even if you're not doing traditional SPA, that's a lot where the technology is heading now. Push as much as you can to the client that's not server specific, and then you can do a lot. And the nice thing is you can put any server under the covers you like too.
Yeah, and that's what's really cool about it.
Yeah.
You can kind of pick your back end. My preference is ASP.NET MVC for the back end, and John I know as well, but it doesn't really matter now, right? Because so much is being moved to the client. What are some of the big technologies you're seeing as far as libraries and things that are pretty popular with this?
They're always very trendy as they go. jQuery, of course, is the biggest one. It's the one I think we were talking the other day. It's almost half the web is using jQuery these days from a lot of the trending reporting stats are out there. But some big ones I'm looking at, like if you want to do CSS with CSS3, or maybe you're stuck with CSS2 based on your browser, things like Bootstrap and jQuery UI help you get more styling. Doing CSS3, there's a lot of sites out there that help you build that into what you're doing.
Right.
Twitter Bootstrap's one, as I mentioned, that's a really nice open source library to help you do styling and responsive design, which is basically the concept of you write one UI and it works on all the mobile devices, whether it's
tablets and all that.
Tablet, phone, your watch device.
Which is scary because if you think about it, 5 years ago, you don't worry about a tablet. There was no such thing. Well, there was. Right. There was an attempt at a tablet, but it never went anywhere, let's face it. Nowadays, it's like if you're not designing for that, you're almost missing the boat, because I know when I travel, and I know you do as well, you bring your iPad or whatever with you, and I'm not whipping out my laptop all the time. I'm on my tablet, so.
Yeah, and the enterprise is really going that route too. A lot of the businesses we work with are dealing with these mobile devices, either for their customers or for internal apps.
Yeah.
So writing one UI that works for multiple sizes and can respond, that's why they call it responsive design, really important.
One of the big things I know I've been seeing, because back in the ASP.NET days, which we could still do this, of course, is you'd have like item templates and alternate item templates and all that. I know there's been a lot of shift. I know you've done a lot of work in this area on the client side. What's some of the libraries out there that you're finding interesting for kind of rendering data without having to write all the JavaScript yourself?
Yeah, there's 3 areas that I really like to look at when you're dealing with writing client-side code that always seem to be a lot of plumbing work. One of those is in data binding.
Yep.
You know, we got spoiled in the XAML world. We got a lot of data binding stuff built in.
Right.
JavaScript, none of that's baked in. So there's a really great library called Knockout.js, which is awesome. And it's written by Steve Sanderson, and it's got a really good following in the open source community. It does a lot of data binding for you, pushes and pulls data out of JSON objects into the screen and then back out. Another one will be coming out soon called JS Views, another open source project that does data binding. They're both really good, have the pros and cons. Another area that you like to look at is the templating.
Yeah.
So in the XAML world, in the WinForms world, in the web forms world, there's a lot of things that you do where you're repeating the same thing over and over again, the presentation of data, and templates really help you do that. And there's a library called JS Render, which just went beta, and it's publicly out there, and it's going to get wide adoption for it, that does quite a bit of really fast rendering. And this one here is pure string-based. So when you're rendering this stuff, it's rendering it quick and easy, right to the DOM once, as opposed to updating the DOM a lot. And then the third area is in handling change tracking and management of state in the client. And there's no one great library that I've seen so far in this. A couple are out there, like Upshot is one that's coming out.
Yep.
There are others out there, but a lot of people are kind of torn on which way to go for those right now. But
I think that's kind of the bleeding edge, wouldn't you say?
It's a pretty emerging area at this point. We're bringing a lot of things we've had in the ASP.NET world and the Silverlight world and the WPF world to the web. A lot of the barriers have really been broken down.
So you can see there's a ton of stuff out there, whether it's client-side templating or data binding, and there's a lot of other technologies such as history, responsive design you talked about.
And routing, yep.
CSS3 has all those features, of course. You have animations and transforms. And the bottom line is, as a developer, so where do you start? Because at one point, if you were really good at, say, whether it's ASP.NET or PHP or whatever your preferred framework is, you were kind of pretty comfortable. And you can, of course, you can still build those apps, but they're starting to feel a little more, I would argue, dinosaurish if you have all the postbacks, because people are just kind of accustomed now, wouldn't you agree, to the page loads, and from then on, I get my data, and it feels almost like a desktop app.
Yeah, you think about like Facebook and Twitter experiences. Everybody goes to Facebook. That's kind of like an SPA right there, where you're on the same page and things just come in and out of place.
Yep.
And that's it's all about user experience. We thought we got away from that, but it always comes back
with a vengeance.
Yes.
So where do you recommend, as if I'm a developer who, I'm already skilled in a lot of different areas, but I haven't touched any of the client-side templating, the data binding, or whatever it may be, where do you start? What would you say?
One of the biggest things is exactly that. Where do you start? What do you learn? Because there's so many different plugins out there that you can try and use, and you don't know which one's going to stick around. I recommend just picking one of each. Doesn't matter if it's the best one or the most widely used. But picking one of each. Pick a templating engine like JS Render, a Knockout for your data binding. Pick History.js for doing your routing and your navigation. Just pick one of each, put them together, build an end-to-end solution, see what you like, what you don't. The key to me is always separating out the code. So use the same practices for server technology on the client, good separation practices, and a lot of times if you want to switch one of those libraries out later, it's not that hard.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it boils down to. One of the things that I know we've both been in a lot is structuring your JavaScript code. And one of the talks, in fact, we're both doing this week here at DevConnections is on techniques and patterns you can follow to keep your code clean, so that if you do want to swap out, like you said, a history library or a responsive design library or whatever it may be, that you can do that. And for me, I think as a developer, if you're, number one, learn JavaScript. That's just how it is now.
Yes.
But if you're going to learn JavaScript, you really do need to kind of learn how to structure your code. And I know John agrees with me because we've had lots of conversations about this and shared a lot of samples, enhanced samples, and stuff like that together. And there's a lot of patterns out there you can follow that will make it so that, number one, you don't have what we call function spaghetti code. And John has a better term he likes. Don't write function spaghetti code, write ravioli code. So it's all kind of componentized or modularized, if you will. And so that's kind of where I'd personally recommend starting, is get your code, get your house in order, if you will. Then once you've done that, like John said, you can pick these different libraries, and it's not as painful to maybe make a switch if down the road one of them turns out to not be a big deal.
Yeah, if you follow that single responsibility principle in general, if any pattern you ever follow, I say follow that one, because this means have your thing, whatever that thing is, do one job.
Exactly.
If you do that, you can always swap in and out, do what you want. You can do unit testing if you want. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. You can modularize. It's a good first step into the JavaScript world. Know JavaScript, learn the pattern, and you're off.
And use the libraries. Well, thanks for having us. I'm John. He's about to go give a talk on Windows 8 Metro apps with XAML right now. Then he has some more. We have some JavaScript talks coming up here at DevConnections. So hope you'll be able to join us at the conference one of these times upcoming. And appreciate you taking the time to tune in and listen to John and I talk about how client technologies are changing.
Yeah, and one of the best parts about these conferences is the hallway conversations that we have with all the people here, the attendees.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.